The palace has secrets. Every corner, every corridor, every gilded room whispers stories that the public could never imagine. And today, you're about to hear one of the most explosive, jaw-dropping scandals to ever shake the royal family. A story so intricate, so shocking, that it forces us to question everything we thought we knew about Meghan Markle, Prince Andrew, and the world behind those glittering walls. The question is simple: how much of what we see is real? And how much has been carefully scripted, controlled, and hidden? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. What if I told you that behind the smiles, the red carpets, and the perfectly posed photographs, something intimate, something undeniably forbidden, was taking place? Something that could destroy reputations, upend dynasties, and rewrite history. Tom Bower, the investigative journalist known for tearing through the polished facades of power, has spent years chasing the story. Years uncovering whispers, following paper trails, speaking to insiders, and piecing together a picture so scandalous that it feels almost impossible to believe. And yet, the evidence is there. The accounts are there. And now, nothing can stop the truth from surfacing. Let's take a moment to set the scene. Meghan Markle arrived in the royal family as a figure of fascination. A former actress, a woman with charm, intelligence, and a magnetic presence. She quickly became the center of attention, adored by some, scrutinized by others. Her every move was photographed, analyzed, dissected. But while the world focused on her public persona, there was a private world few could see, a world where power, privilege, and desire collided. And it was in that hidden world that Meghan allegedly crossed paths with someone few expected, Prince Andrew. You may be thinking, Prince Andrew? Surely not. The same Andrew, Duke of York, embroiled in controversy, yet still a figure of royal tradition, responsibility, and headline-making stories? Yes, the same man. A man whose life has always seemed larger than reality, whose actions have sparked speculation, scandal, and intrigue. But what Bower has uncovered suggests a connection between him and Meghan Markle that goes far beyond casual encounters or public appearances. Allegedly, a connection that became intimate on multiple occasions, hidden from the cameras and carefully shielded from the public eye. Why does this matter? Because the monarchy, the institution that commands fascination across the globe, is built on perception, on trust, on duty, on careful control of image. Every scandal, every whisper of impropriety, threatens that carefully maintained order. And when the private becomes public, when a truth too shocking to ignore emerges, the consequences are immediate, dramatic, and unforgettable. But before we go further, consider this. How often do you truly see the private lives of those in power? When Meghan Markle walks through those palace gates, smiling for the cameras, is she the same person behind closed doors? And when Prince Andrew navigates the labyrinthine halls of royal protocol, what secrets are tucked into the corners of his life that the world will never see? Until now. Bower's investigation doesn't just reveal events. It exposes motives. It uncovers patterns. It connects dots that were intentionally left unconnected. There are accounts, eyewitness testimonies, hints from insiders, and leaked information that together paint a picture of something far more intense, far more secretive, and far more consequential than anything previously reported. And let's be honest, there is a human fascination in scandal. We are drawn to the forbidden, the dramatic, the stories that push boundaries. The royal family, despite its centuries of tradition, is not immune. In fact, its very power, wealth, and privilege make its members magnets for scrutiny, speculation, and the occasional allegation that borders on unbelievable. But what Bower has uncovered is not rumor. It is not idle gossip. It is meticulously documented, deeply investigated, and tied together in a way that leaves almost no room for doubt. Imagine the scene. The golden halls of the palace, ornate chandeliers casting light on the corridors, servants moving silently through the shadows, and two figures whose lives were meant to remain entirely separate, crossing paths in ways that were carefully hidden from the public. Each encounter, brief, deliberate, intimate, carries consequences far beyond the moment. Every whispered conversation, every private meeting, every carefully hidden message adds to the narrative that Bower has spent years uncovering. The palace is a fortress, but even fortresses have cracks. And through those cracks, the truth has been seeping for years, until it could no longer be contained. This isn't just a story about relationships, temptation, or intrigue. It's a story about power, influence, secrecy, and the lengths people will go to protect or exploit their position. It's a story about what happens when two worlds collide, one of celebrity, allure, and ambition, the other of tradition, duty, and scrutiny. But let's pause for a moment. You may be asking, why now? Why bring this to light today? Because Bauer's investigation reaches a point where the evidence is undeniable. The accounts, the timelines, the corroborations, they all converge. And in an age of constant media coverage, where no secret remains buried for long, the story demands to be told. It demands attention, debate, and reflection. And most importantly, it demands that we, the audience, reconsider the image of Meghan Markle, Prince Andrew, and the world behind the palace gates. Now, here's the part where things get truly compelling. Bauer doesn't just hint at encounters. He details moments that are intimate, repeated, and consequential. Moments that suggest a pattern, a connection that neither the palace nor the public were meant to see. And as you follow this story, you will see the layers unfold. The timing, the secrecy, the whispers, the consequences. Each piece, when combined, forms a mosaic so shocking that it challenges the very narrative we've been told about these figures. And yet, there is nuance. There is contradiction. There are moments where public statements diverge sharply from private actions. There are incidents that, on the surface, seem harmless, but within the hidden context, reveal a web of intrigue, manipulation, and desire. Bauer navigates this terrain with precision, connecting dots that were deliberately obscured and highlighting patterns that even seasoned observers may have missed. The story of Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew, as revealed by Bauer, is more than a tale of intimacy. It is a lens into the pressures, temptations, and vulnerabilities that come with life under constant scrutiny. It is a reminder that even those who seem untouchable, shielded by wealth, status, and protocol, are human. And it is proof that secrecy, no matter how meticulously maintained, eventually meets the light. But what comes next is even more shocking. Bauer doesn't just reveal encounters. He reveals the reactions, the fallout, and the ripple effects that extend far beyond the palace walls. The way these alleged actions intersect with public perception, media scrutiny, and royal protocol creates a story that is, at once, dramatic, tragic, and impossible to ignore. And now, we begin to see the full picture. The stage is set, the players are in position, and the first cracks in the palace's polished facade are appearing. What Bauer has uncovered is a story that challenges assumptions, surprises, and shocks. It is a story that cannot be ignored, and once you hear it, you will understand why. So stay with us, because the journey we are about to take is not for the faint of heart. It is a journey into power, desire, secrecy, and revelation. It is a journey that asks one question. When the hidden truths come to light, can anyone truly run or hide? The palace is never silent. Even when the gates are closed, the golden chandeliers dimmed, and the public cameras turned away, whispers echo through corridors lined with portraits of monarchs long gone. Every hall, every wing, every opulent room holds a story. Some are whispered among the servants. Some are hidden in diaries. Others are locked away behind layers of protocol and power. And yet, even in a place as controlled and regimented as Buckingham Palace, secrets have a way of slipping through. Enter Meghan Markle, a woman who, by all appearances, seemed to arrive at the palace with nothing but charm, elegance, and a bright, aspirational smile. A former actress from California, she was immediately thrust into a world where every gesture, every word, every glance was scrutinized. The media followed her relentlessly. The public admired her. The royal family observed. And yet, beneath the polished images and carefully orchestrated appearances, there was a private world few could imagine. A world of power, tension, and relationships that were not meant to be exposed. From her very first days in the royal fold, Meghan became a lightning rod. She was modern, outspoken, ambitious, and for some, threatening. Royals are expected to conform, to blend seamlessly into centuries of tradition. But Meghan brought something new. She brought energy, charisma, and an unmistakable presence. And in that energy, some saw opportunity, some saw danger, and some saw temptation. It was in this highly charged environment that Prince Andrew remained a prominent figure. The Duke of York, son of Queen Elizabeth II, was no stranger to controversy. Known for his charm, wealth, and somewhat unpredictable behavior, Andrew had cultivated a reputation that was as complex as it was public. His life, filled with grand events, elite circles, and high-profile engagements, was meticulously chronicled, but not entirely understood. Behind the public persona was a man whose private life was shrouded in speculation. And into this mix stepped Meghan. Now, you may be asking yourself, how could a figure like Meghan, new to the royal stage, even begin to intersect with someone like Andrew, whose life had been under scrutiny for decades? The answer lies in the intricate web of royal events, private gatherings, and elite social circles that bring together individuals who, on the surface, seem worlds apart. Banquets, private dinners, charity galas, and state functions, these are not merely ceremonial. They are opportunities for the powerful to meet, observe, and sometimes influence one another in ways invisible to the public eye. The first glimpses of this connection were subtle. A shared glance across a room. A private conversation at a reception. Moments so discreet that those around them barely noticed. But for those who were paying attention, these moments were pregnant with implication. And over time, as these private encounters accumulated, a pattern emerged. A pattern that Tom Bower, in his meticulous investigation, would later identify and connect in ways that were both shocking and undeniable. Picture this: a dimly lit corridor after a charity event. Meghan, elegant in a tailored gown, walks with poise, her smile polite but knowing. Prince Andrew approaches, his presence commanding yet surprisingly casual in its familiarity. A few whispered words exchanged. A subtle touch, fleeting yet deliberate. To anyone else, this would seem innocuous. But in the context of their world, where every action is measured, every movement observed, and every association noted, these small interactions took on a significance that could ripple far beyond that moment. It is easy to dismiss the notion of intimacy in such a rigid, controlled environment. After all, the palace is designed to uphold protocol, to prevent scandal, and to maintain an image of decorum. But as Bower discovered, even in the most controlled spaces, human desires, ambitions, and mistakes find a way. Private spaces exist. Unmonitored moments exist. And in these spaces, relationships that should never form sometimes do. And the intrigue doesn't stop there. The connections between Meghan and Andrew were not simply accidental or fleeting. According to accounts gathered by Bower, there were multiple encounters over time. Encounters that were carefully shielded from the press, hidden from staff, and unknown to the wider public. Moments that, if revealed, could shake the very foundations of the royal image. The palace thrives on perception, on the careful crafting of appearances. And yet, these encounters threatened to expose a reality far messier than the public narrative. The stakes were enormous. For Meghan, a relatively new member of the royal family, navigating the labyrinthine rules of tradition, an intimate connection with someone as prominent as Andrew could carry risks beyond imagination. For Andrew, whose reputation had already weathered storms, the consequences could be devastating. And for the royal family as a whole, the implications extended far beyond individual relationships. Scandal, after all, does not remain contained. It spreads, it echoes, and it reshapes narratives in ways that can never be fully controlled. And yet, there was an almost magnetic quality to these interactions. A mix of ambition, curiosity, and desire that drew them together despite the risks. It is a reminder that even in a world dominated by rules, protocol, and centuries of tradition, human nature asserts itself. The palace, for all its grandeur, cannot suppress curiosity, cannot eliminate attraction, cannot erase the complexity of personal relationships. Bower's investigation shows that what may have seemed like small, insignificant moments were, in fact, pieces of a larger puzzle. The way Meghan moved through the royal world, the subtle influence she wielded, and the choices she made, all of these intersected with Andrew's own complex narrative. Together, they created a series of encounters that, when viewed in isolation, might have appeared trivial, but when connected, revealed a pattern that was both deliberate and consequential. And as the investigation deepens, we begin to see not just the encounters themselves, but the reactions, the tensions, and the quiet manipulations that surrounded them. The palace, despite its size and its influence, is not immune to the effects of secrecy. Every decision made in private can ripple outward, influencing public perception, media narratives, and personal reputations. And this is precisely what Bauer captures with such meticulous attention. He documents not just the events, but the context, the consequences, and the emotional undercurrents that give them weight. Consider the timing of these interactions. Meghan's arrival coincided with a period of intense scrutiny for the royal family. Media narratives were evolving rapidly. Public opinion was divided. And within this context, every private action carried amplified consequences. The timing, the setting, and the secrecy of these alleged encounters all contributed to their impact. And the fact that they were repeated over time suggested more than a fleeting curiosity. It suggested a sustained, deliberate pattern of behavior that would later become central to Bauer's revelations. And yet, the intrigue is not purely scandalous for the sake of shock. There is a human element here, a story about desire, opportunity, and the complexities of navigating relationships within an environment that is both luxurious and constraining. The tension between duty and personal interest, between public image and private choice, is palpable. And it is this tension that makes the story so compelling, so dramatic, and ultimately so explosive. Even those within the palace who were not directly involved began to sense that something was different. Small discrepancies, unexplained absences, whispered conversations. These are the things that feed speculation and create an atmosphere of tension. And when Bauer began piecing together accounts, timelines, and testimonies, he revealed that these seemingly minor details were part of a much larger, far-reaching story. What is fascinating is how these encounters were not only about personal connection, they were about influence, access, visibility, power. Meghan, as a newcomer, was learning the unwritten rules of the royal environment, navigating the expectations of tradition while asserting her presence. Andrew, as a long-standing figure within that world, understood the stakes. The dynamics between them were complex, charged with both risk and opportunity. And it is precisely this complexity that Bauer captures with such skill, providing readers and viewers with a narrative that is as intricate as it is compelling. So, as we begin this journey, it's essential to understand the stage upon which these events unfolded. The palace is not just a backdrop, it is a character in itself. Its grandeur, its history, and its protocols shape behavior, dictate possibilities, and amplify consequences. And within this environment, Meghan and Andrew's alleged interactions took place, hidden from public view but rich in implication. Not all truths are easy to uncover. Some lie hidden behind layers of secrecy, protocol, and careful obfuscation. But others are impossible to ignore once someone with enough persistence begins to dig. Tom Bauer is that person. Known for his tireless investigations into the private lives of public figures, Bauer has spent decades peeling back the polished surfaces of power, exposing scandals, and revealing truths that many hoped would remain buried. And the story of Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew is no exception. Bauer's approach is methodical, relentless, and exacting. Unlike many journalists who rely on hearsay or sensationalism, he builds his investigations like a puzzle, piece by piece, connecting dots that others deliberately leave unconnected. He interviews insiders, cross-references accounts, and corroborates every detail before ever committing it to print. His reputation is built not on rumor, but on the careful assembly of evidence. Evidence that in this case paints a portrait of intimacy, secrecy, and repeated encounters between Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew that few could have imagined. The investigation began quietly. At first, Bauer noticed anomalies in publicly available information, reports of private meetings, unexplained absences from official engagements, and whispers from sources who, for decades, had been on the inside of the royal machine. It was these small inconsistencies that piqued his interest, the tiny cracks in the palace's otherwise impeccable facade. And as any seasoned investigator knows, it's often in the cracks where the most revealing truths reside. Bauer spent months, then years, tracking these leads. He pored over photographs, scrutinized event schedules, and analyzed travel itineraries. He cross-referenced social events, charity galas, and private functions, looking for overlaps that could explain the repeated encounters between Meghan and Andrew. It was painstaking work, requiring patience, persistence, and an unwavering eye for detail. Yet with every document, every interview, every piece of corroborating evidence, a clearer picture began to emerge. Perhaps most critical were the insider accounts. Bauer spoke to staff members, aides, and acquaintances who had observed interactions that never reached public scrutiny. Some were hesitant, wary of the repercussions of speaking openly. Others were motivated by frustration, a desire to reveal truths they had long kept silent. Slowly, Bauer assembled a tapestry of testimony, each thread adding texture, nuance, and a growing sense of inevitability to the story. What makes Bauer's investigation so compelling is his insistence on context. It's not enough to simply report an encounter. He examines timing, motivations, and patterns. Why did certain meetings occur in private? Why did some events coincide with official absences? What subtle signals or behaviors were consistently repeated over time? By asking these questions and rigorously pursuing answers, Bauer uncovers a dimension of secrecy that the palace has worked for decades to protect. And then there are the documents. Emails, messages, travel logs, and records that, on the surface, appear mundane, but within the larger narrative, reveal patterns of intentionality and discretion. Bauer's meticulous attention to these details ensures that his account is not mere speculation, but a carefully constructed investigation supported by evidence. Each revelation is contextualized, each claim is substantiated, and each thread is woven into a coherent narrative that exposes the private realities hidden behind public appearances. Bauer also leverages historical knowledge. As someone who has chronicled the monarchy for decades, he understands the patterns of behavior, the subtle hierarchies, and the mechanisms of control that govern royal life. He recognizes that the palace, while imposing and carefully managed, is not impervious. Human behavior, ambition, and desire intersect with tradition in ways that produce tension, secrecy, and sometimes scandal. This contextual expertise allows him to interpret events, actions, and encounters in a way that is both credible and revelatory. But Bauer's work is not without obstacles. The palace is a fortress of secrecy. Staff are trained in discretion. Protocols are strictly enforced. Public relations teams work tirelessly to control narrative and perception. Every step of the investigation required caution, sensitivity, and strategic thinking. Sources had to be protected. Leads had to be verified without alerting those who would seek to suppress information. It was a delicate balance between persistence and prudence, aggression and subtlety. One of the most striking elements of Bauer's investigation is the accumulation of small, seemingly insignificant details that, together, create a compelling narrative. A private dinner here, an unexplained meeting there, a coincidental schedule overlap. Each event might appear isolated on its own, but when connected, they reveal a sustained pattern of interaction, repeated encounters, and deliberate discretion. Bauer's skill lies in connecting these dots, in revealing the larger story that others either ignored or could not see. What emerges from this painstaking work is a portrait of intimacy and secrecy that few outside the palace could have imagined. The alleged encounters between Meghan and Andrew are not isolated incidents. They are part of a larger pattern of behavior, repeated over time and carefully concealed from public view. And the implications are staggering. These are not just private indiscretions. They are moments that intersect with power, influence, and public perception. It's also worth noting the subtlety of these encounters. Bauer documents not only what allegedly occurred, but how it occurred. The environments, the timing, the mannerisms, the signals that were exchanged. There is an almost cinematic quality to these accounts, illustrating the complexity of navigating intimacy within the confines of palace protocol. Every glance, every gesture, every whispered word carries significance. And in this high-stakes environment, the consequences of exposure are enormous. Bauer's investigation also raises questions about motivation. What drives individuals in positions of power to engage in secretive interactions? Is it desire, curiosity, opportunity, or a combination of all three? By analyzing behavior in context, Bauer provides insight into the human dimension of these encounters. He shows that, despite privilege, wealth, and status, human nature still exerts its influence. Ambition, desire, and risk-taking remain constants, even behind palace walls. And as the investigation progresses, Bauer uncovers corroborating accounts that provide depth and credibility to the narrative. Witnesses who were previously overlooked, events that were dismissed as coincidence, and anomalies in scheduling and protocol, all converge to create a picture that is increasingly difficult to dismiss. Each piece of evidence reinforces the pattern, each account adds clarity, and each revelation builds toward the shocking conclusions that the book ultimately presents. But Bauer's investigation is not just about documenting events. It is about understanding consequences. He examines the fallout from these encounters, both within the palace and beyond. How did public perception shift when hints of scandal emerged? How did royal aides, staff, and family members respond to whispers of impropriety? What strategies were employed to contain, control, or deflect potential exposure? These are the questions Bauer answers with the same rigor and meticulous attention that define his work. And the result is a narrative that is as compelling as it is explosive. Bauer does not rely on sensationalism. He relies on investigation, evidence, and context. Yet the story that emerges is undeniably shocking. It challenges assumptions, disrupts narratives, and forces us to reconsider our understanding of both Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew. What was once hidden, carefully concealed, and obscured by protocol, is now laid bare for the world to see. As viewers, we are drawn into this process of discovery. We follow Bauer as he navigates the complex web of secrecy, connecting threads, verifying accounts, and revealing a reality that the palace had long hoped to keep hidden. And the tension builds with every revelation. Each interview, each document, each corroborated detail adds weight to the story, heightens suspense, and prepares us for the shocking truths that lie ahead. But just as Bauer begins to reveal the full scope of his findings, one critical question arises. If these encounters were repeated and deliberate, what does that mean for the palace, the monarchy, and public perception? How does one navigate scandal in a world where perception is everything and image is closely guarded? The answers are complicated, explosive, and deeply intertwined with the events that Bauer documents in painstaking detail. And here is the turning point. The investigation does not merely hint at intimacy. It provides evidence of a repeated pattern, interactions that suggest both awareness and deliberate discretion. The subtlety of these encounters, combined with their recurrence, creates a narrative that is impossible to ignore. The palace may control appearances, the media may craft narratives, but the evidence, meticulously gathered and analyzed, cannot be erased. And as we move deeper into this story, we begin to see the impact of Bauer's investigation, not just on the public, but on the palace itself. The whispers, the anomalies, and the evidence all converge to create a sense of inevitability. Secrets that were once hidden are now on the verge of exposure. The stage is set. The players are in place. And the next revelations are poised to shock, surprise, and fundamentally alter our understanding of Meghan Markle, Prince Andrew, and the intricate world of the monarchy. The first encounter is always the most electric. The one that sparks curiosity, sets the tone, and carries a tension that lingers long after the moment has passed. In the glittering, gilded world of the palace, such encounters are rare, fleeting, and fraught with consequence. And yet, according to Tom Bauer's investigation, Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew shared a series of moments that went far beyond mere introductions or polite conversation. The first of these, subtle and almost imperceptible, would mark the beginning of a pattern, one that, once uncovered, reveals layers of secrecy, desire, and calculated discretion. It began at a private reception, an event that seemed, on the surface, routine. Royals mingled with dignitaries, charity organizers, and influential figures. Cameras were present, But the majority of the evening unfolded behind closed doors, away from the public eye. Meghan, relatively new to the royal fold, navigated the crowd with grace, poise, and the unmistakable charm that had captivated millions. Her movements were deliberate, yet seemingly effortless, a blend of elegance and confidence that commanded attention without demanding it. And then, across the room, he appeared. Prince Andrew, a man whose life had been under scrutiny for decades, whose charm and presence were both magnetic and controversial. The two exchanged a glance, brief, casual, but weighted. In the context of the palace, where every interaction is noted, every gesture measured, this seemingly innocuous moment was anything but ordinary. The initial interaction was carefully observed by a few attentive aides and staff members, though it passed without comment in public accounts. Meghan and Andrew spoke quietly, a conversation that lasted mere minutes but left a lasting impression. According to Bauer's sources, it was the kind of encounter that lingers in memory, not for its overt drama, but for its subtle intensity. A shared laugh, a fleeting touch on the arm, the exchange of knowing glances. Small details, but ones that hinted at curiosity and connection. What makes a first encounter significant is not merely the moment itself, but the implications it carries. In the palace, appearances are everything. Relationships are scrutinized, motives analyzed, and boundaries carefully monitored. For Meghan, this was a moment of navigation, testing the waters of her new environment, establishing presence, and understanding the nuances of royal protocol. For Andrew, it was a subtle negotiation of interest, observation, and perhaps temptation. Each was aware of the stakes, each aware of the eyes that could be upon them at any moment. Bauer's investigation shows that this initial meeting was only the beginning. While casual observers would have dismissed it as polite conversation, insiders began noticing a subtle pattern. Encounters that seemed coincidental, but were increasingly deliberate. Private discussions after events, shared moments at charity gatherings, even brief meetings in hallways, all suggested a familiarity that extended beyond simple cordiality. These first encounters, initially discreet, laid the foundation for a series of interactions that would become more intimate over time. One source described the atmosphere as charged, yet restrained. The staff, who had long been accustomed to royal formalities, noticed small anomalies. Lingering glances, exchanges that seemed to last just a fraction longer than necessary, the way Meghan and Andrew sometimes positioned themselves in relation to one another. Nothing overt, nothing scandalous in public view, but enough, according to Bauer, to indicate that a connection was forming, quietly, deliberately, and privately. And then there were the moments outside formal events. Palace life is structured, but private spaces exist. Off-limits corridors, unmonitored lounges, secluded gardens. Bauer's accounts indicate that Meghan and Andrew used these spaces to converse, often alone, away from cameras and the constant presence of staff. These meetings were brief, controlled, yet intimate in tone. They were exercises in discretion, a delicate dance where every word and gesture carried weight. Consider the psychological tension inherent in such encounters. Meghan, stepping into a world defined by centuries of protocol, must navigate relationships carefully. Andrew, aware of the scrutiny and implications, must maintain composure while managing private impulses. And yet, despite the inherent risks, these first interactions carried a magnetism, an attraction of intellect, presence, and opportunity that made them difficult to ignore. Bauer highlights this tension repeatedly, illustrating how the combination of curiosity, ambition, and human desire intersected within the controlled confines of palace life. What makes this pattern so compelling is how quickly it escalates from fleeting curiosity to deliberate interaction. The first encounter, though subtle, serves as the test. Will they recognize the boundaries, respect the public gaze, and maintain decorum? Or will the private world, unseen, unmonitored, and rich with opportunity, begin to pull them closer? According to Bauer, it was the latter. The initial spark, measured and discreet, began a series of meetings and exchanges that would recur with increasing frequency. And yet, the tension was constant. Every encounter carried the risk of exposure, the possibility that a staff member, aide, or curious observer might notice. The palace operates on layers of observation. Every corridor may have eyes, every room has cameras, and every staff member is trained to note anomalies. Meghan and Andrew, aware of this scrutiny, conducted themselves with careful precision. Their first encounters were as much about control as about curiosity, a lesson in restraint, subtlety, and discretion that would define their interactions going forward. Bauer emphasizes that the significance of these first encounters cannot be overstated. In the context of the palace, where relationships are tightly monitored, appearances meticulously curated, and private desires constrained by public expectation, these early interactions reveal not only personal interest, but an understanding of timing, discretion, and the mechanics of secrecy. Each glance, each brief conversation, each carefully chosen phrase carried layers of meaning. And it is precisely these layers that make the alleged encounters so compelling and controversial. But as with any story of human interaction, complexity emerges quickly. These encounters were not simply about curiosity or attraction. They were entwined with power, influence, and the subtle negotiation of status. Meghan, new to this environment, was navigating a delicate balance between asserting presence and respecting hierarchy. Andrew, long accustomed to the scrutiny and expectations of royal life, was equally aware of the boundaries, the optics, and the implications of any connection. Their first encounters, therefore, were as much strategic as they were personal, a blend of discretion, testing limits, and careful observation. Bauer's accounts also reveal an element of repetition. The first encounter, though seemingly minor, was followed by others, each building on the previous one, each adding complexity, each heightening the tension. The palace, vast as it is, becomes surprisingly intimate when viewed through the lens of private meetings, shared conversations, and the subtle choreography of behavior in constrained environments. The initial spark ignited a sequence of interactions that, over time, revealed both intent and consequence. And yet, the public remained unaware. To the cameras, Meghan was the dutiful new royal, graceful, composed, and smiling. Andrew was the established figure, performing protocol, engaging with dignitaries, and maintaining appearances. Behind the scenes, however, Bauer's investigation uncovers a different narrative, private moments of connection, repeated encounters, and an intimacy that was deliberately shielded from view. These first encounters were only the beginning, laying the groundwork for a series of interactions that would ultimately be documented, analyzed, and revealed in astonishing detail. The first encounter is always the most revealing, and in this case, it set the tone for everything that followed. The subtlety, discretion, and intensity of these initial meetings created a framework within which subsequent interactions unfolded. Bauer's meticulous documentation ensures that we can see not just the encounters themselves, but the broader implications. How private desires intersect with public duty, how discretion coexists with curiosity, and how even in the most controlled environments, human nature finds a way to assert itself. And as the investigation progresses, the intensity escalates. The encounters move from glances and whispered words to moments of deliberate connection, always under the radar, always calculated, always intimate in ways that challenge both protocol and perception. What started as curiosity becomes a pattern. A series of repeated interactions that, when viewed together, reveals something extraordinary, something undeniable. Once the spark is ignited, the next step is always the most dangerous. In the palace, danger doesn't come in the form of physical threat. It comes in the form of exposure. One wrong glance, one overheard word, one careless slip, and an entire world of discretion collapses. And according to Tom Bauer's investigation, Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew were no strangers to calculated risk. Their encounters, initially fleeting and subtle, evolved into private meetings, moments hidden from public view, moments that would shape a narrative the world would never have imagined. These secret meetings were not random. They were deliberate, carefully orchestrated, and perfectly timed. The palace, for all its grandeur and structure, has spaces that remain unmonitored. Lounges, hallways, staircases, and gardens. It is within these spaces that Meghan and Andrew found opportunity. According to multiple insider accounts, they would arrange meetings during breaks in official events, using the excuse of routine protocol to navigate the corridors undetected. Every gesture, every movement, every exchange was calculated to maintain secrecy while fostering connection. Bauer describes these encounters in painstaking detail. They were brief, often lasting just a few minutes, yet charged with intensity. A whispered conversation behind a closed door, a shared laugh over a mutual observation, a subtle touch of the arm or a hand brushed against another, small gestures, but highly significant in the context of palace life. In a world governed by protocol, where even minor interactions are scrutinized, these moments carried enormous weight. The secrecy of these meetings added to their allure and their danger. Meghan, new to the royal fold, had to learn the unspoken rules of behavior. What could be said, what could be done, and where boundaries existed. Andrew, experienced in navigating the scrutiny of public life, understood the stakes intimately. Together, they created a rhythm of interaction that was discreet yet deliberate, a choreography of risk and desire that only they fully understood. According to Bauer, the meetings were often accompanied by careful signals. A hallway left momentarily empty, a staff member distracted at just the right moment. Timing was crucial. Even the most subtle miscalculation could have exposed them. And yet, these encounters continued, repeated over days, weeks, and months. It was no longer a chance connection. It was a pattern, one that required careful attention, planning, and a mutual understanding of secrecy. Insiders reported that the atmosphere during these meetings was a mix of tension and exhilaration. The palace is a controlled environment, but within these private moments, Meghan and Andrew could speak freely, laugh without restraint, and exchange thoughts that would be impossible in public. These meetings were the true private world behind the gilded walls, a world where curiosity, attraction, and ambition intersected. But secrecy comes with psychological cost. The constant awareness that one's actions could be exposed at any moment heightens tension. Every meeting carried the weight of potential discovery. Bauer emphasizes the mental toll this would have imposed on both parties. The adrenaline, the anxiety, the thrill of the forbidden. It is this combination that made the meetings intoxicating and addictive, a pattern that, once established, was difficult to break. And the methods of concealment were subtle yet ingenious. Messages were passed discreetly, often using intermediaries or leaving notes in locations that only they knew. Meetings were scheduled around official duties, taking advantage of gaps in the palace schedule. Every encounter was brief, controlled, and carefully monitored by the participants themselves. Bauer describes these methods as a blend of strategy, discretion, and instinct. An intricate game played in plain sight, yet invisible to the untrained eye. What makes these secret meetings particularly compelling is their repetition. They were not isolated incidents, but part of a sustained pattern. Over time, the frequency of encounters increased, as did their intensity. What began as curiosity became deliberate engagement. Each meeting reinforced the connection, deepened the understanding, and heightened the stakes. For outsiders, it appeared that Meghan and Andrew were simply fulfilling official duties. For insiders, it was clear that something more intimate was unfolding. Bauer also uncovers a fascinating dynamic: the interplay between public appearance and private interaction. While Meghan and Andrew maintained impeccable decorum in public, their private meetings revealed a starkly different reality. Laughter, shared confidences, and subtle intimacy contrasted sharply with their polished public personas. It is this dichotomy, the tension between what is visible and what is hidden, that makes the story so compelling, so dramatic, and ultimately so explosive. And yet, the risks were never trivial. Palace staff are trained to observe, protocol is strict, and cameras are everywhere. One misstep could expose not only the individuals involved, but also create a scandal that reverberates through media, public perception, and the monarchy itself. The very act of secrecy added suspense, making each meeting both thrilling and dangerous. Bauer captures this tension, showing how the interplay of risk and reward shaped behavior, influenced decisions, and propelled the story forward. As the investigation progresses, it becomes clear that these secret meetings were not random. They followed a deliberate pattern of timing, location, and interaction. Some took place in the early hours, when the palace was quiet. Others occurred during official events, exploiting gaps in supervision. Each encounter was meticulously planned, reflecting a deep understanding of both opportunity and risk. This careful orchestration is what makes Bauer's findings so extraordinary. It is not just that the meetings occurred, but that they were sustained, repeated, and strategically executed over time. The psychological impact on both parties is also significant. Secrecy heightens emotions, amplifies desire, and creates a sense of complicity. Bauer reports that the interactions between Meghan and Andrew were charged with this intensity. Every whispered word, every subtle gesture, every brief touch carrying layers of meaning. It is a reminder that human behavior, even in environments dominated by protocol and tradition, is complex, dynamic, and often unpredictable. And then there is the ripple effect. These secret meetings did not exist in isolation. They influenced relationships, decisions, and perceptions within the palace. Staff noticed anomalies, aides speculated, and subtle shifts in behavior were observed. Bauer's investigation shows that even hidden actions have consequences. Sometimes immediate, sometimes delayed, but always significant. The very act of secrecy alters dynamics, introduces tension, and sets the stage for eventual exposure. But the most startling revelation from Bauer's investigation is the sheer number of these encounters. Far from being isolated incidents, they were repeated multiple times over months. Each meeting, carefully hidden from public view, reinforced the connection between Meghan and Andrew. And as the encounters accumulated, the implications became impossible to ignore. These were not casual interactions. They were deliberate, intimate, and sustained. What makes this even more shocking is the meticulousness with which the encounters were managed. Meghan and Andrew were acutely aware of the stakes, the scrutiny, and the consequences. Yet they continued, balancing desire with discretion, risk with opportunity. It is this tension, this high-stakes interplay, that Bauer captures in extraordinary detail, revealing a story of secrecy, intimacy, and human complexity that few could have anticipated. And as we move deeper into this story, the secret meetings set the stage for revelations that are even more dramatic, more intimate, and more consequential. What began as subtle curiosity has evolved into repeated encounters with layers of meaning, consequence, and intrigue. The stage is set. The players are in motion, and the world is about to witness revelations that will shock, surprise, and fundamentally alter the narrative we thought we knew. Secrets have a way of evolving. What begins as curiosity, a fleeting glance, or a whispered conversation can quickly transform into something more deliberate, more intimate, and more dangerous. According to Tom Bauer's investigation, Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew's interactions followed this very trajectory. The initial spark, ignited in casual, seemingly coincidental encounters, had grown into a series of private meetings that escalated in both frequency and intensity. And as the encounters deepened, the stakes rose dramatically, threatening reputations, exposing vulnerabilities, and creating a web of secrecy that few could navigate without risk. The escalation was subtle, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, yet profound in its impact. Each encounter built upon the previous one, layering familiarity with tension, connection with discretion. The palace, despite its vast size and strict protocols, is not immune to human behavior. Hallways become stages, lounges become private theaters, and even the most controlled environments can host moments of intimacy if timing and opportunity align. Meghan and Andrew, according to Bauer's sources, became increasingly adept at exploiting these moments, balancing the thrill of secrecy with the discipline required to avoid detection. It started with extended conversations in private corridors, conversations that moved from polite topics to shared confidences. They began to discuss matters that were not part of formal protocol, mutual frustrations, personal observations, and subtle flirtations that hinted at more. The intensity of these interactions grew over time. Where the first encounters had been brief, measured, and cautious, the later meetings carried an undercurrent of desire, curiosity, and unspoken understanding. Bauer emphasizes that these moments, while still discreet, were markedly different from initial interactions, they reflected a deepening pattern of private connection. The psychological dynamics at play were complex. Meghan, new to the royal environment, was learning not only the outward rules of protocol, but also the hidden codes of influence, access, and power. Andrew, experienced in navigating the scrutiny and limitations of public life, understood both the risks and the opportunities inherent in such interactions. Together, they created a rhythm of engagement that was both calculated and spontaneous, measured yet infused with emotional intensity. According to insiders, the encounters became a private game of negotiation, an intricate dance where timing, proximity, and discretion were paramount. Bauer's investigation provides vivid detail about the settings of these encounters. Some took place in secluded corners of grand palace gardens, shielded from view by hedges and architectural angles. Others occurred in lesser-used lounges and sitting rooms, spaces that, while official, offered moments of privacy. The choice of location was deliberate, reflecting both awareness of risk and desire for intimacy. Every meeting was brief, but each was deliberately structured to maximize the private connection while minimizing exposure, a delicate balance that required sophistication, awareness, and coordination. The intensity of these encounters also escalated emotionally. Early interactions had carried curiosity and intrigue. The later meetings brought subtle emotional stakes. Sources described whispered jokes, shared smiles, and small gestures that conveyed complicity and trust. These were not overt acts visible to the public or even to most palace staff, but the emotional weight was palpable. Each encounter reinforced connection, creating a private world that existed alongside the public persona of both individuals. Bauer's documentation highlights a particularly striking pattern. The encounters were often strategically timed around public events. Large banquets, charity galas, and ceremonial engagements provided cover, as attention was directed elsewhere. Meghan and Andrew would find moments between speeches, during the shuffle of arrivals and departures, to exchange words or gestures that carried private meaning. These carefully orchestrated opportunities suggest a level of planning and awareness that goes beyond simple chance. They indicate deliberate engagement. The consequences of this escalation were significant. While private, these encounters were not entirely without risk. Palace staff, aides, and other insiders noticed anomalies. Unusual timing, extended private discussions, or unexplained absences. Even in a place as controlled as Buckingham Palace, patterns emerge, and observant individuals began to notice. The tension created by these observations added a layer of psychological pressure to the encounters. Every interaction was infused with the thrill of secrecy and the anxiety of potential exposure. Bauer also details the interplay of power and influence in these meetings. Meghan, as a newcomer, was asserting herself in a world defined by hierarchy and tradition. Andrew, already entrenched in the royal environment, wielded influence and familiarity with protocol. Their interactions, while personal, also reflected a negotiation of position, access, and control. Each meeting was an exercise in understanding boundaries, testing limits, and exploring the interplay of human desire within an environment that simultaneously constrained and amplified it. The escalation continued over weeks and months. Where initial encounters were cautious, later interactions showed a subtle boldness, an increasing willingness to engage in moments that, while private, carried significant risk. Bauer's sources indicate that these meetings were repeated with growing regularity, suggesting a pattern of deliberate engagement rather than accidental or coincidental encounters. The pattern itself became a defining feature of the relationship, repeated, discreet, and emotionally charged. It is crucial to understand that the escalation was not merely physical or emotional, it was also strategic. Every encounter was designed to maintain secrecy while deepening connection. Timing, location, and behavior were all carefully calibrated to avoid detection. This deliberate approach reflects both awareness of the stakes and an understanding of the consequences, emphasizing the calculated nature of their private interactions. Bauer also highlights the role of communication outside these meetings. Subtle messages, notes, and gestures conveyed information, intent, and reassurance. Each interaction, each piece of correspondence, reinforced the pattern, creating a network of private engagement that existed alongside the highly structured public life of the palace. These private channels of communication amplified the connection, allowing interactions to escalate in both intensity and frequency without triggering alarm. Yet the escalation brought inherent danger. The palace is a world of observation, rumor, and protocol. The more frequent and intense the encounters, the greater the risk of exposure. Bauer's sources recount moments of tension where a passing aide, a staff member rounding a corner, or a camera angle threatened to reveal what had been carefully concealed. The stakes were never trivial, and the psychological pressure added a layer of intensity to each encounter. The thrill of secrecy became inseparable from the fear of discovery. And as the encounters escalated, the impact on both Meghan and Andrew became increasingly complex. Emotional attachment, curiosity, and ambition intertwined, creating a web that was as compelling as it was dangerous. Bauer illustrates how these dynamics evolved, showing not just the mechanics of the meetings but the human emotions that made them irresistible despite the risks. Desire, opportunity, and tension combined to drive repeated engagement, creating a pattern that would ultimately become central to his investigation. The escalation also sets the stage for the most controversial revelations. What began as curiosity and discreet interaction would evolve into repeated moments of intimacy, interaction, and consequence. These encounters, hidden from public view but meticulously documented by Bauer, reveal a private dimension of the palace that challenges perceptions, disrupts narratives, and reshapes our understanding of both Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew. Secrets thrive in quiet spaces. They grow stronger with repetition, emboldened by trust and the thrill of forbidden risk. According to Tom Bauer's investigation, Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew's private encounters had escalated beyond fleeting meetings and whispered conversations. What Bauer uncovered were moments of intimacy, subtle, deliberate, and repeated interactions that carried emotional weight, personal significance, and undeniable impact. These were not merely casual exchanges. They were private, charged, and deeply consequential. The first moments of intimacy were small, almost imperceptible. A lingering glance, a hand brushing against another, a smile held just a fraction longer than protocol permitted. In the highly controlled environment of the palace, such gestures stand out. They signal interest, establish connection, and communicate familiarity that words cannot capture. According to insiders interviewed by Bauer, these small moments were the initial indicators that the interactions between Meghan and Andrew had moved beyond curiosity into a personal, intimate dimension. Bauer emphasizes the psychological complexity of these encounters. Both Meghan and Andrew were acutely aware of the stakes, public perception, palace protocol, and the ever-present possibility of exposure. And yet, the thrill of secrecy created a heightened emotional intensity. Each gesture, each whispered word, carried layers of meaning. In private, away from cameras and aides, the interactions became more than just meetings. They became a language of intimacy, subtle but unmistakable. These intimate moments often occurred in spaces that offered privacy, but required careful planning. Unused corridors, secluded gardens, private lounges. Each location was chosen to minimize risk while maximizing opportunity. According to Bauer, Meghan and Andrew displayed an almost instinctive understanding of timing and discretion. They could navigate the palace with an awareness that allowed them to engage without drawing attention. Every movement was calculated, every pause deliberate, every glance loaded with meaning. The intensity of these private interactions also escalated over time. Initial gestures, brief touches, or shared laughter gave way to longer conversations, whispered confidences, and subtle acts of closeness. Sources describe exchanges that conveyed trust, mutual understanding, and emotional connection. In the palace, where appearances dominate and public behavior is scrutinized, these private moments were a sanctuary, a space where both could engage authentically, even if fleetingly. What makes these moments of intimacy particularly compelling is the contrast between public and private behavior. Meghan, in public, maintained composure, elegance, and poise. Andrew presented himself as the experienced royal, composed and disciplined. Yet behind closed doors, Bauer's sources report, the interactions were markedly different. Laughter flowed more freely. Gestures were more personal, and the emotional connection became palpable. This duality, the contrast between the public facade and private reality, amplifies both the drama and the tension of the narrative. Bauer's investigation details instances where these moments of intimacy were repeated, sometimes multiple times in a single day. A brief private conversation in the morning could be followed by a discreet gesture during an afternoon event. These interactions created a rhythm, a pattern of connection that grew stronger with each repetition. And because each moment was carefully orchestrated, the sense of risk heightened the emotional intensity, reinforcing the bond in ways that public encounters never could. The nature of the intimacy also evolved. While early interactions were largely emotional and subtle, Bauer reports that later encounters carried additional layers of personal closeness. Shared jokes, confidential comments, and mutual support created a sense of trust that underpinned their relationship. These were not simply friendly exchanges. They were deliberately private, emotionally charged interactions that signaled a deepening personal connection. The escalation of intimacy was not without tension. Both Meghan and Andrew understood the potential consequences of exposure, scandal, public scrutiny, and personal risk. The palace is a world governed by observation, and even the most discreet gestures can be noticed by an attentive aide or recorded by a strategically placed camera. Bauer emphasizes that the thrill of secrecy, combined with the fear of discovery, intensified every interaction, making each moment emotionally heightened and psychologically compelling. Furthermore, the pattern of intimacy was often linked to specific occasions or opportunities. Private gatherings, off-schedule events, and quiet moments between official duties became the settings for these encounters. Bauer documents how these moments were planned with precision, using knowledge of the palace routine and staff movements to create windows of privacy. The orchestration itself is striking, demonstrating both awareness of risk and determination to maintain connection. Another critical aspect highlighted in Bauer's work is the role of mutual reinforcement. Each moment of intimacy reinforced the next, creating a feedback loop of emotional engagement, trust, and desire. The private interactions were not isolated. They were cumulative, building a narrative of personal connection that was both deliberate and compelling. This cumulative pattern, repeated over time, is central to understanding the depth and complexity of their relationship. Bauer also draws attention to the emotional stakes. These encounters were not just physical or social, they carried psychological weight. The private moments allowed both Meghan and Andrew to explore connection, understanding, and emotional resonance in ways that public life never permitted.